Anybody here a farmer? You know anything about weeds? You know? I tell you, I lived among farmers in southern Iowa when I was growing up, to the point that when they would gather at the hardware store that my father had, all they'd do is they'd sit there, they'd look at each other, and they go, yeah, Harold, out the west of town, weeds in his corn. And I tell you, they used to crucify people practically on the basis of how many weeds they've got. No wonder when Monsanto and others introduced weed spray to kill all the weeds, they all got excited. They're like, we don't have to walk it anymore. A couple days ago was my 45th wedding anniversary. Connie and I were so busy we didn't even know it was our 45th wedding anniversary. We knew it was our wedding anniversary. That was good. And then we started adding it up and we thought, whatever. So anyway, that didn't deter us. You know, we're out rolling our thing. When I dated Connie, I used to go out to her. I done with church. I used to use music at the church and help the pastor, you know, kind of thing. Kind of like an assistant pastor or whatever. I'd have my white suit that I would wear, you know. Yeah, I know. White suit, the whole thing. You should see my shoes shine. Oh, they were beautiful. Then all of a sudden, I go out to the country where her dad was a farmer in order to court my wife. And I get there, and the first thing I do, he'd be standing there, and he'd go, you want to do something for me today? And I'm like, no, but yes. I need you to walk the beans. Okay. Like this? Yep. And I'd walk the beans with that little sigh thing, and I'd whack them all up and everything else, and I thought, this is punishment. What I didn't realize was he was trying to keep his name good in the community by getting rid of all the weeds that had taken foothold and gone up. You look around now, does that ever happen to you? If you grew up, you look around, you see how many weeds are in a guy's field. If you got a lot of weeds, what do you say? Slacker, you know. He's not doing what he does. That's why people spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get rid of those weeds so their neighbors don't talk about them. Yeah, it impacts the crop too, but you know, the whole thing is you just don't want to have weeds growing out of your thing. Jesus talks about this kind of stuff. He says, man, you focus on that kind of stuff. You focus on, you know, you kind of say, yeah, I'm a Christian, and we got a patch of weeds. I mean, people look at us and go, what do you do with your life? Where is your faith lived out? You know, where does it look like? And when some people see us, friends, they see a patch of weeds. They see people who idly sit by and just whatever grows first grows. You know, it's one of those private things we don't talk about, our faith. You imagine that? You know, I grew up in a time when people said to me, there's two things you never talk about when you go somewhere. I used this line the other day. You don't talk about one thing, which is politics, and the other thing is what? Oh, yeah, you've been indoctrinated from the beginning. Religion and politics. Or you get up in the Lutheran area, and all of a sudden they'll tell you things like, you know, our prayers are very humble and quiet. Methodists do that too, you know. I go into my closet to pray privately. I don't pray out loud. And how about your faith? Well, that's a private thing too. We just don't talk much about that. In reality, what they're saying is, I'm not a used car salesman, and I'm not going to go out there and try to talk somebody into coming to church because I'm not a used car salesman. I sell the real thing. I remain quiet and silent. And whoever gets there. Or they take on a predestination, you know, thing that says to us, the only reason you're in church is because God predestined you to be there, so therefore I'm not going to go out and try to reach anybody because God already knows who he wants to go to church, and they're already here. Nobody else out there. Friends, we are United Methodists. The world is our parish. John Wesley would roll over, as he does a lot in his grave, at what the United Methodists do today, because you know what? It's about who we are and what we do. For 9 years, I headed up evangelism and spiritual formation for the annual conference. One of the saddest things was I'd go to a church to talk about evangelism. That's who I was. I walk into the church, and the pastor would sit there, and he'd go, before you start, Phil, could you do me a favor? What's that? Don't use the E word. I've told you this before. I said, well, what's the E word? Evangelism. Don't talk about that. I'm like, are you serious? No wonder we're declining. You know, you placate your congregation, letting them stay where they are with the weed patches they grow. That's not what it's about. That's not what Jesus said was part of his word. There's a little insert in your bulletin today. It's kind of the outline of my sermon. I may not preach it all, but you can read it and you'll hear the whole thing. But it talks about that you and I are preachers. Did you understand that? Now, my wife says to oftentimes, she goes, I am an introvert. I don't like to get in front of people and I don't like to talk. You're with me? And she goes, I just happen to be married to you and you're an introvert. You're quiet. You never talk much. You never say anything. You know, that's your issue. No, she says, you know what? You're out there just talking. She goes, that's who I am. That's how I think. Because I got to bounce it off people. Well, I don't. I just have to have quiet time, etc. But you get my wife out in a group of people. Let me tell you what. You should see what she does. I just can't believe it's me. You all, have you ever asked somebody in the congregation, I want you to go out and invite somebody to church, and they go, oh, I can't do that. Oh, I'm not a preacher. That's why we pay you, Pastor. And I'm thinking, what? Don't you realize what the Scripture says? Don't you realize that we preach a sermon every day by how we live? You understand that? You're preaching, friends. You're preaching every day by how you live or what you do or what you don't do. You are preaching. And that makes a vital difference in the world in which we find ourselves living. You know, I've been to churches we talked about how can we grow? And the churches go, well, it'll just happen, I guess. You know, whoever shows up, you know. It's like, are you kidding me? You know, last thing I want is to be at a church where all of a sudden you get zero in the congregation. You know, that just means we got weed patches growing. Things aren't, we haven't got our focus. It's not happening. We don't realize that we're preaching every day by how we live our lives and by what we do and don't do. You're known in this community by who you are and what it is this church is all about. And God didn't put you 5 miles outside of town. God put you smack dab in the middle of downtown Mingo, almost, and says to you, you have a position, you have a role to play. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later because you have a role to play. It's who you are and what God's called you to do at that particular point. Here's the other thing. Do you realize that when people look at me, they say, oh, he's the pastor. He just does that kind of thing. You know, he's paid to be the person. Or churches that say to me, we pay you, pastor, to bring people into our church. I love that. I said, are you kidding me? You know? See, friends, you know people I'll never know. And if I tell them to do something, they'll just look at me and go, he's the pastor. Sorry. But they look at you, and you know what? They'll believe every word that you say. And you know what? They'll come to you over and over again. They want to know what you think. They'll come to you for counsel. You know who those people are. And maybe they don't touch anybody else. Maybe they don't talk to anybody else, but they talk to you. And I don't think it's by accident. I think God puts them into your life and into your, because you're the one person they have a relationship with. Do you hear me? Or 2 or 3 people. You're the person they have a relationship with. And if you tell them something, they'll believe it. And they don't think you're trying to sell them a used car. They'll believe it. They'll believe who you are. They'll believe what you say. Why? Because oftentimes you give them time and energy and effort and counsel, and you're there to hold their hand and to talk to them because they trust you. They love you. That's why they come back to you. You're the only voice that they may listen to that doesn't have to try to convince them in some way that you're not a used car salesman. They know who you are. They know your heart. And because of that, you and I have a relationship and a responsibility to those people. That's what John Wesley said. That's what Jesus Christ said. That's what God said. There's a reason and a purpose. And that's why you go out and you live your life by preaching a sermon to them every week. And if you're not excited about your faith, if you don't plant a seed of God in their life, then friends, you're not fulfilling what it is that Jesus says for us to do. Did you know that Jesus said a few things about that? Do you realize that's a majority of what Jesus talked about? He starts out by going to these guys and saying to them, guess what? You fish? Guess what? I'm going to make you fishers of... Oh, who am I preaching to? The audience? You know this stuff. I want you to go out and I want you to fish. Use the same technique